Welcome back to Lit versus Genre, everybody. I am Steve.
And I'm Jeff. We've missed you, everybody.
We've missed you for a while. We had a
hmm
holiday. I hope yours
We did.
yours was good, Jeff.
hmm It
Um,
was.
lots of
Welcome to
board.
2022, everybody. A bit belatedly, but here we are in the
Here we
future.
are. Here we are.
hmm
Let's
hmm
let's let's get through another one. Let's just
Right.
get
And
through it.
2022 has got to be better, right? It's got to be. Got to be.
Well, one thing that's going to be very different
Yeah.
about 2022 is that we are doing new content. We're not
Oh,
just a Wheel of Time channel
wait,
anymore.
what's new, Steve?
Because
What's
we've kind of run out of Wheel of Time. Well, I mean, you can never
okay?
run out of Wheel of
You
Time.
can
And
never
that's not
run
possible.
time.
But we are going to be looking at some other stuff. We wanted to branch
We
out.
are.
And
I'm
today
excited.
we are looking at the series, Amazon series Invincible.
Come on.
Knock it off, Todd.
I think Amber's been pretty clear about how she feels. I'm nothing like my dad. I want to be just like you.
I've fought to keep this planet safe. Your power's got to be due any day now, son.
Morning.
Versus original comic series Invincible. Oh, I should have looked up
hmm
like what years these came out, but these are early
Oh,
2000s.
yeah, I actually did. Yeah, it was like
Okay.
2002.
2002.
2002 -ish,
Okay,
ish, I want to
cool.
say. And now I feel like I've totally got to double check that. But yeah, something around there for the first one. Now I'm checking. Now I'm checking. But yeah, this has been out for a while. I read up that he did actually 144 issues
Okay.
of
I wasn't
Invincible.
sure. Yeah.
And oh my goodness, man, do we have some stuff to talk about? Like this to me is the perfect thing to discuss after Wheel of Time, whether you're a Wheel of Time fan or not. But to talk about an adaptation after that,
Mm.
plus Wheel of Time to this, I'm super pumped up. But I know you might have some things you want to begin with, so feel free, or I'll just launch in.
Well, I guess what's really interesting is that we're kind of flipping roles now. This is a
We are.
thing that
We are.
I read first
Yes.
many years ago. This was like
Yeah.
something that I
Understandable.
had not come back to in quite a while because this is a pretty old series. And then watched the show where you watched the show first, and then we were like,
Yeah.
oh, we should talk about adaptations, and so
Yeah.
much of Wheel of Time was about adaptation and like
Right.
comparing different
Right.
adaptations across lots of genres. And so how much, Jeff, do you think, because I feel like again our roles are reversed. I feel like this is one where you like the show a lot
Oh
and the
yes.
show is more your first experience with it, whereas over
Sure.
in
We
Wheel
could
of
talk about
Time,
the bias
yeah,
from that. Yeah.
I wouldn't say like I like the show a lot, but I think I was a bit more open to the show than
Mhm.
some people who were book readers first. And like,
Mm,
what
mhm,
a
yeah.
kind of what is that phenomenon? Is that baked in? Is there something where you'll always like the first version of the thing that you see more?
Yeah, I was thinking about that for sure because, especially after Wheel of Time, where, I read the books first and obviously preferred that to the show. And then for Invincible, I did, after reading this, I did prefer it. But I think there's some very different reasons in that in Invincible, which is one reason I'm like so excited to talk about it.
Mm,
But it did get me thinking about how much of that is maybe my bias of just whatever I'm seeing first is what I latch on to, and then that's what I want to see again or whatever. So I was trying to think of an example where that wasn't the case, and this is another reason why I'm pumped for us to do more of these
yeah.
adaptations, right? To see how often this will hold true. But the main one that I came up with was Jurassic Park. That I
Mm,
saw the movie Jurassic Park first, loved it. Of course, how could you not love Jurassic Park, right?
right.
But then read the book and was like, oh wow, this is even better to me.
Uh-huh.
Now, was it better just because I was getting more in a world that I loved? Maybe, right? And that's often what a book can offer, right? Um, but that is my one example, and I hope to have more as time goes on because I would like to break the mold. I don't know why, just to do it because I don't want to believe that there is this bias that just locks us into always liking the thing we see first.
That one is interesting. I read that when I was really young. I remember
Mm.
reading the book as a kid way before the movie. I didn't even know there was
Oh,
going to be
okay.
a Spielberg
Okay.
movie.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
can kind of imagine my insane elation upon learning there was going to be a Spielberg movie because
Right.
also like
Right.
Indiana Jones
Is
was my
Spielberg
favorite series
right?
of all. I mean, I think
Mm.
as a little kid, Indiana Jones meant more to me than Star Wars did. I mean, they were like
Mm.
close, but like I now,
Yeah.
I think Star Wars
I
is
think mine was Back to the Future.
back
I
to
always regard them as like as the three great trilogies:
true,
the
yeah.
Star Wars, the Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. Those to me were like the
Right,
epitome of
right.
trilogies.
Because
Yeah.
and also the way they do the same kind of pattern where the first and third one are
Mm.
more similar and then the second one's
Right.
like way out
Right.
there.
The second's like, what is this? What is this second
It's
movie?
kind of weird that
Yeah.
those three
Right.
major
You're
trilogies,
right
the
though. It
holy
is.
trinity of
It is.
trilogies, let's say. Let's
I am
let's
fine with
name
that
that right
name
now.
completely. And I'm also fine forgetting anything else beyond those exist in those worlds.
Yeah,
So,
right,
yeah,
right,
no,
exactly.
I'm
Never
fine
happened.
with
Never
that.
happened, y'all. Uh,
Yeah, those are the
but
only canon movies.
but I
That's it. But anyway.
remember being really excited for the movie,
Mhm.
and then I saw
Yeah.
the movie, and I think I was disappointed
Mhm.
by the movie. I think compared to the book, because the way I kind of
Oh, well,
saw
yeah.
the
Yeah.
book in my
Mhm.
head was like, well, the book is like way more violent. The book is like
Yeah.
way more intense. It
It
sort of made
is.
me feel like it was like Alien, but with dinosaurs, and that's
Mm,
like kind of more
mhm,
what I
mhm,
wanted than
mhm.
more like
Right.
fun Spielberg adventure. So I remember
Yeah,
at the
I can see that.
time I was like down on the movie. Now that I'm
Mhm.
older though, like I did do a reread of Jurassic Park, and
How did it hold up?
it is still fun, but I
Okay.
think the things that I liked as a kid were like kind of how dry and scientific and like explainy it is. And like
Okay.
that's all
Okay.
like kind of fun. I think when you're a kid, you're like, whoa, this is genius. I haven't really like
Right.
run into these really
Right. These
technical science,
ideas.
yeah, these ideas. And I'm
Right.
so excited by these ideas.
Mhm.
But then on my reread, I was like, oh, the characters feel kind of a
Mm.
little bit more flat here and disposable
Right.
because again there's like more of a
Mm.
body count in that book, and it doesn't really
Yeah, I
feel
do
like
remember that.
I'm super connected to them, whereas like in a
Mhm.
Spielberg movie you're gonna feel connected to the
Oh,
characters, right? Like
so good. Well, and those
so
actors, like, I mean, the cast is
yeah,
just, I mean,
yeah,
perfect. Yeah, it's
yeah.
great.
And he
Um,
does more to
mhm.
kind of make you care. I think he does a little bit more to hit on this like
I
dad
could see him doing that.
relationship thing where he's like an
Yeah,
awkward dad. He doesn't want to be a dad to these
maybe.
kids. But he like
We're just
kind of
gonna have to go
gets
back and do Jurassic Park.
yeah, well,
I'm
it's
like,
it's an
now we're getting into it.
adaptation.
I'm like, now I need to read this book again. But anyway, so I mean, I think everyone can pause and think like, what for you is maybe something you've seen in two mediums and you actually
Mhm.
like the second one
Yeah.
better. And I would love to hear those comments in the chat because we do continue to read comments.
Mm.
So we'd love to hear that from you all.
Please,
But I'm
please.
sorry if you had something else with that. Feel free to
No,
say.
but just that it was an interesting
Mhm.
one that I've gone back and
Yeah.
forth on it, and in different stages of my life, I
Mhm.
liked one
Mhm.
more than the other, and that's also like
Right.
another kind of
That,
interesting aspect
that's
to
still
this.
something though.
Yeah, right?
Where you could like to equally or shifting at different
Yeah,
times in your life.
yeah.
I think that's great. That would be the ideal to me almost, as opposed to one necessarily being so much better than the other. Why not be able to enjoy both? So yeah, I would say that feeling of both is close for me on like Princess Brides, which I'm very eager for us to for us
Mm,
to eventually cover. But I'll save that for then.
okay.
But for Invincible, did you have some
Yeah,
initial
no, you
thoughts on
kind
it
of tell me
besides?
what your thoughts were of it because you had
Mhm.
watched it
Mhm.
first and then
Right.
recommended it to me. And what's kind of
Yeah.
interesting that it wasn't super on my radar. I mean, like
Hmm.
I don't have the full run of this comic. I did kind
What's
of
along? Yeah.
actually, well, it's really long, and I did kind of
Mhm.
just kind of drift away from this. And
I could
same
see
with
that.
Walking Dead. Like Kirkman
Mhm.
was not my favorite when I kind of
Right.
got back into comics because like I had like, been really into comics in
Mhm.
middle school and high school. Drifted away from it in like
Gotcha.
late high school. In college, I didn't collect any comics at all. And then like in the early 2000s, it was basically I was like on tour with my band and I just like went into a comic shop because we were on tour
Mhm.
and you're killing time a lot when you're like
Right.
traveling around in a van with a bunch of your friends. So we just went into a comic
Sounds
store
great.
and then I was like, boom, I got like super sucked back into comics like instantly. I bet
Mm.
other people have had this sort of experience with like old hobbies or old
It was
things.
video games for
Was it
me.
video games?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I got super sucked into it, and that was right around the time that like Robert Kirkman and Walking Dead. I was like a little bit late
Mm.
to the party on both of those.
Okay.
But I got
Okay.
into them, and then I kind of just drifted away from them because I feel like
Mm.
a lot of what he would do would get a bit more static. Like you wouldn't feel the
Mm.
forward momentum, and
Okay.
it's something I want to talk about with this series because I
Yeah.
don't think it happens here in this series because this series is very neatly bookended
Yes.
by like kind of the first major arc of the comic
Mhm.
series.
And no
But
spoilers for the future.
right,
No
I
spoilers, 'cause
won't
I'm
give
not
it because
reading
I
it.
barely remember. I had to reread
Cool.
these
Well,
comics to really
we're safe. We're
remember
safe, everybody.
like
We're
how it
safe.
went. So I don't really remember what's going on, but I do
Yep.
remember kind of just not
Mhm.
feeling the momentum of it. And I felt the same way with
Mhm.
Walking Dead, where it felt like we were treading water a lot to kind of
Mm.
stretch it. And so that's where I was. So I wasn't into like jumping into the series. I wasn't like super
Sure.
hyped for it or anything. And
No,
then
that makes. I could see that after reading this.
Mhm.
I mean, that sort of gives away my opinions, but after reading this, I could feel that same way. Like, I was like, oh yeah, and it was show. I'm like, oh my goodness. But
See,
anyway,
that's so okay. So
right.
we need to break that down because after
Mhm.
rereading it, you were like, "Oh, this is very, very different adaptation." And what you were surprised
Oh,
about was it
definitely.
was not hewing
Right.
as closely to the source material, but you liked it. Versus Wheel of Time, where it was like, a
Mhm.
mortal sin to hew away from the source material. When I reread these comics again and also
Well,
watching it, I was like, no, I vaguely remember these
mhm.
aliens that time moves
Right.
faster. I
Yeah,
remember,
yeah, yeah. A
obviously I
lot of the same
remember
plot
like the
points.
big
Yeah.
plot point.
Mhm.
And actually
Yeah.
rereading the comics, I was like, this feels faithful as hell to me. Like
Oh,
this
it
feels
was
like
really faithful.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
really
I
wildly
just meant
faithful.
that they didn't start. They didn't start the same way, is what I
Right.
mean. Like
Right.
in the first episode, we're assuming at this point that everyone has seen Invincible, the show. If not, stop
Yeah.
this. Go
Yeah.
watch it.
Let's
It's
do
amazing.
spoilers
Okay.
here because it's
So,
basically impossible to talk about the differences
yeah,
without
we can't talk
yeah.
about the difference without talking about this. So pause this video, do yourself a favor, go onto Amazon Prime and enjoy one of the best animated shows ever created. Go do
Whoa.
that.
Whoa.
Then
Whoa.
come
All
back
right.
and
All
join.
right. All
Then
right.
come back and join for this
I didn't
conversation.
know we were
Ever
up at
created.
that level. Okay. Okay.
Oh,
Well,
absolutely. No, Invincible is amazing to me. And so I know people think I hate everything after Wheel of Time and all that. Invincible is incredible. But so I just before we, well, two things. One, the difference I meant was that I was really surprised that this didn't start the same way because that's
mhm.
such a crazy way that the first episode of Invincible starts. And if you're still here listening, haven't watched Invincible, make it through the first episode. The first episode can feel like, it's just like copying other things and sort of slow and the whole like
Mhm.
beginning between two guards or whatever. Just make it all the way, watch all the way to the end. That's when the show starts. So yeah, go do that.
Yeah.
So it's surprising to me that this didn't do that, but I know why. And I'm just gonna go. I can't stop myself
Yeah.
anymore.
Right.
So this, this, and the show should be taught in every writing program that exists. This is like a master class on what you can learn as a writer because the difference with this, book two or
Mhm.
comic book two screen is that it's Robert Kirkman who did the first episode of the show. And
Right.
he is doing it after 144 issues with these characters.
Mm.
He is a better storyteller. He was in his early 20s when
Mm.
he releases. He was like 23, 24, right?
Right.
What he has learned about storytelling and how emotional beats work, how character works, you can see the difference between them. Between in this, where we kind of really only know about him and the dad. Some, don't get me wrong, there's some other characters you definitely meet.
Mm.
But in the show, everybody's got some sort of motivation. Everybody's got something going on. You can
Mm.
compare like scene for scene the way things are handled and these extra beats that he gives these characters. I'll give one quick example. The mom. The mom is just knocking on the door in the comic book. In the show, she just walks into the bathroom while he's using it.
Mom, what? I'll be out in a minute.
I don't have a minute.
Mom.
My bathroom's out of soap. Get over yourself. I used to change your diapers, kid. There's nothing going on down there I haven't seen before.
Just get out.
Mm.
Immediately upping the stakes and tension there in like a different, not upping stakes, but like upping their relationship, like making it more in your face. And he does that a lot. Like you actually get to see the Guardians, right? As in this one, it's just like, they're gone. This one, we get to see them twice. We get to see them with a brand new action scene in the beginning, and then when Omni-Man goes to confront them. And that changes the way that scene feels. It's amazing comparing these two things to each other. And to me, seeing the growth of a writer and their ability to tell stories.
Okay.
So that's my take.
All right. Well, let's drop the big plot point now so that we
Yeah,
can talk about
sure.
it. In
Go
both
for
the
it, go for
show and the comic, we're following this kid who has just come into his powers, kind of like
Great.
post-puberty thing or whatever. Is like developed his powers, which is kind of sometimes like a trope in certain
Sure.
comic book things.
And it goes so fast.
And his dad's
really
like a
both of them.
superhero, this biggest, most powerful, maybe superhero on Earth.
But
So
more
now,
downplayed in the show for good reason. But go ahead. Yeah.
oh, interesting. Was it more downplayed in the show? Okay.
Yeah, he's more kind of on the outs with the Guardians. You see that early where they don't quite trust him. Stuff like that. So, yeah.
But anyway, really like well-known superhero in the world and really powerful. And then so like it kind of has this dynamic of, will I live up to my father?
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. And then it's revealed. So a lot of this is kind of wrapped up in things about reveal that I kind of want to talk about. It's
absolutely want to talk about that.
revealed that the father is evil, and the act that reveals it to the audience or to the reader is that he kills this good guy superhero team.
Which is basically just the Avengers. Oh, well, no,
Right.
it's basically DC. Sorry, it's DC.
Justice League more,
It's
right?
Justice League.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. Yeah, they're all like just
We're the
copies
same.
of Justice League characters.
Right.
You got the Green Lantern character, you got the Batman character. This is a copy of that.
Right.
They even make fun of Aquaman. It's kind of great. But yeah.
So that's the central
main setup.
conflict, is that, you know, the dad is
Right.
evil somehow. You don't really know
We don't know
why
why or
he's
how.
done this, and this is a mystery, but it's kind of promised that this is going to be a confrontation. Obviously, it's a big problem for the main character.
Right. Setting up later tension.
Right.
And
So-
obviously, I know how you feel about reveals, and I feel like this one's different in regard. But oh no, please go ahead if you're
I
going to say something
mean,
else.
yeah. So, kind of thinking about how they both work. One thing that I think is interesting is I think in the show you can definitely do that as your capper to the first episode. It's a good grabber. It's going to give you momentum into the rest of the series. A first issue of a comic, 22 pages of a comic, especially kind of how
Right.
decompressed. Now we're like kind of deeply in the style of decompression here. Like kind of rereading this comic, I was
Where they use the same shot
they
over
use
and
the
over.
same shot over and over, and it even comments on it and makes it like
I
a
know.
joke at one
I know.
point.
I'm like, no, this doesn't work. Stop doing it.
right. So it's very decompressed. It's kind of the style of
Yeah.
comic at the time, and it is.
Right.
It's been a much discussed and derided aspect. I've even talked about it on our channel before. But there is like no way, I don't think, you could have dropped that at the end of issue 1
Yeah,
of
I can
this
see that
comic.
being. I don't want to like go look at what was the. I hear that. I mean, I'm not a comic book writer, so for me, I don't know the pacing as well. for that. But I hear what you're saying. To give it the
Like,
time it
yeah, we will
needs.
not have like lived
Um,
with the dad long enough yet.
right,
We will not
right.
have developed any
Yeah.
emotional connection to the dad
Hmm.
whatsoever. And I think one thing
Right.
that the comic does nicely that I liked
Hmm.
better than the show was because we don't know that about him, these other
Hmm.
things like when the aliens suck him into another dimension and he's gone
Hmm.
for like a long period of
Right.
time because time works differently, that
Yeah.
felt sadder and like
Yeah.
more
We're more worried
hurtful
for
to the
him.
mom, and the mom is more
Hmm.
emotionally affected by these things
Hmm.
earlier, and that to me kind of, I'm not liking him
Hmm.
directly, but I'm kind of getting to know how much he means to the other characters who are gonna be
Sure.
betrayed by this. And that to
Right.
me I felt worked a little bit better. I think it's
Hmm.
really interesting the difference in decision between the way it's revealed in the comic,
Yeah.
the way it's revealed in the show. And it's like a thing where I can't say that I like one better. I think this is one where it's a
Yeah.
different medium. Like I was kind of saying when we were
Mm.
discussing adaptation with Wheel of Time,
Sure.
that when you're in a
Sure.
different medium, you have to
Yeah.
change something. And I think this was something that was
Mm.
wise to change in
I
the
think it's a good
show
change.
format. Yeah,
Hmm.
I don't think I would do it differently in the comic book though. I don't think like going, oh, he became a better writer, he should have done that in the comic. I don't think that's true. I don't think it would work the same
Uh,
way. And
well,
there
I
is
don't know
one other
about
quibble.
I'm not, I wouldn't say when we place that is
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, but the way he builds up the Guardians more,
Mm.
and completely changes the tone of their, well, not completely, but changes to a degree the tone of their relationship, I think is just, I mean, this show just far surpasses what I read in this comic, personally. So,
Hmm.
but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean that is interesting, and it's a I do like that aspect. I'm trying to remember back to
Mhm.
episode 1, like how that was set up. Like in the comic, literally they're introduced to
Right.
be killed, right? Like in that
Exactly.
issue.
We get to see them be awesome,
Mm,
basically,
mm,
in the show. So that, and he struggles to beat them.
right.
He's injured by the end
Mm,
of it.
mm,
Such a better choice. So much better. That's what I meant about like adding in more tension to the scene. Um,
mm.
yeah. So there's just countless. I mean, okay, I'm sure they could be counted, but there's so many little choices, little differences like that that just, oh, it makes it sing
Okay.
together. But
Yeah, I mean,
sorry,
I
I don't
guess
just I'm super
that
passionate about it. In comparison, I'm very
right,
passionate
right.
about it.
It just feels
Yeah.
hard to quantify because like you're like, "Oh, I love that." And I'm like, yeah, I like it, but I'm not like, oh my god, that battle
Uh,
was more drawn out. That's amazing. Like
oh,
I don't
it's
I
so
don't
powerful the way
care.
it's drawn out. Like with Red Rush punching him and stuff.
uh
Like, I mean, that was amazing. That's like some of the best action ever in animation. And I'm saying like also from Japanese animation, like it's
right,
incredible what
right.
they've done with those shots. And you care about them more because now you've seen them a couple times. And sure, it's all
Mm,
within the scope of one episode, so it is still
mhm,
tight. I will
mhm.
certainly agree with that. But yeah, not like all I can hear. It's just like, oh, they're here, oh, they're okay.
Well,
And it wasn't hard at all.
I think this is gonna
Yeah.
be like maybe I'm starting to see, because I
Mm,
think a whole bunch of our podcast is us
mm.
trying to figure each other out. Like why do we
Yeah, right,
deviate,
right.
and like what does
Sure.
one person care more about and the other person
Mm,
doesn't? And I think
mm.
what I'm
Right.
seeing here is you definitely care about this like cool
Visuals?
action,
Oh, hell
that
yeah.
happens in
That's why I
it.
love Kung Fu. Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
yeah, well,
yeah. And so
well,
do
that's
you. So
interesting.
that's,
So do
yeah,
I,
right?
but in
Right.
animation form, what is it? I don't care about it as much in
Mm,
animation form as I do about
interesting.
seeing the amazing kind of acrobatics
That they
and
have to do in real life.
choreography, and
Hmm.
that seems
Yeah.
more. I've always kind of felt about kung fu is like, oh, this is like why people are really into dance. People who
I
are
was gonna
into
say,
dance
I was
and
literally gonna
love
say
watching it. This
dance.
is
Yeah, yeah.
my
Because you're
dance.
impressed. Right.
Right. I'm
Hmm.
impressed by the
Hmm.
physicality of it. I'm impressed by
Right.
the beauty.
Mm.
It feels more
Right.
beautiful that it's a real human body. I
That
mean,
it's a
animation
person
is beautiful.
doing
I'm
it.
not trying to say a drawing isn't
Mm,
beautiful. I love
mm,
a
mm,
drawing. But also, there's something about for comic books to me that
mm.
I love the still image. that
See, I
there's
think this we're going to diverge. I have trouble with comics, but go
right.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
so interesting. And maybe it's just like what you get into early in
I
life
think
or
so.
something. Because I
Yeah.
love seeing the still image. And also like the thing about the
Mhm.
comic Invincible that's interesting is that he has a major artist change. And the artist change
Oh, I was
happens.
wondering about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All
the
right.
original artist
Does
is
that happen in the
Corey.
first few episodes? I'm sorry, the first few issues?
It does. The guy who ends up doing the rest of the run is
Okay.
this guy named Ryan Otley, and he's still working in the industry. He just finished like a Spider-Man run like just recently, and he is the kind of amazing thing about him is the style feels very similar to the first
Mm.
artist. He doesn't come on until I think issue like 12 and maybe he does 12 and 13, like the last
Oh,
two
okay.
in
Okay.
the
Okay.
arc.
All right.
And you almost could not notice it because it's very
Oh, I thought it
similar.
happened way earlier. Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of very similar take or
Mm.
style, but he's just a lot more advanced, a much better like kind of
Mm.
draftsman and composition wise, and the art gets a lot better
Mm.
after that. But there is something to me about like I love seeing the pose
Mm.
frozen because what I think is amazing about this is it doesn't hurt pace to have that in a comic book. Like I kind of like don't
Mm. You can
like
just like stare at the image as long as you want, kind of thing. So
yeah,
you
but
create your own pace,
you
basically.
create your own pace and you can
Mm.
soak it in a way that I
Right.
never really like slow-mo. I mean I like
Mm.
slow-mo at times in a movie, but
Mm.
like
Right.
definitely
Right.
people can like overdo it
Mm.
and like in a movie I want to see it
Mm.
fluidly happen. In a comic I get to go, "Oh, I don't feel like it's slowing down for me, but I get to like really pour
Right.
over the image and like a singular
Mm.
powerful image just feels amazing to me. And I want like us both to talk
Mm.
later. I want like as a new like
Right.
a series to do to
Right.
just be here's the thing I love. I try to convince you
Yeah.
of this thing I love. And there are like other
Well,
comics.
that was Wheel of Time, right? So
Right, right. And well
that works. That works. But no, I'm down. I'm definitely down to try some
yeah, I
images
want
for
to show
sure.
you just some comics where
Uh,
I'm like, look at this image. Look at what Frank Miller did with this still
listen,
image that just
I
feels overwhelmingly powerful to
I
me.
did have a moment like that. I did
Mhm.
because I was kind of going through this. It's great we're talking about this because I was sort of feeling it, but I felt a little weird bringing it up. Like I don't know if like the style the comics are given it.
Mm.
Like to me, animation is just better comics. Basically, it's like the way comics are
Oh,
supposed to
damn.
be,
Okay.
right? Which is like I understand. It's like comics with a budget, basically to me.
Mm.
Um, but I like us getting to have this discourse. So I'm glad you're bringing it up because I agree. I think there is something powerful about a still image, and obviously there are things you can do. Like there was one that I really appreciated where it one I don't even know what they're called. One block went into
Panel.
another block because you one panel
Yeah.
where you saw like the back of William's head and the next one was like the front of William's head. So you
Mm.
could see them side by side that they were the same image, but it was a different panel. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that I experienced really what you're talking about, and I was like, okay, no, never mind. I'm wrong. There are moments. So don't get me wrong. Like I love Watchmen. I usually did more funny comics as a kid, like Foxtrot and
Mm-hmm.
Calvin Hobbes and stuff.
Right.
But this one right here.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Which they do
that
directly in
one,
the show again.
yeah,
What's
they
really
did. But
funny.
I felt this one. Like I turned
Mm,
the page and I was like, damn.
yeah,
Like
that's that feeling that you do in a comic that
yeah,
it hits you
I
all
had
at
it. I had it.
once. It
It
isn't
hit,
led
hit me.
up
I
to
was
it.
like, that's the splash page. And like I
Especially
only
on
knew
a
it from
page turn.
technical.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the page turn splash page. This is called splash, right?
Yep.
Where it's all
Mm,
one.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just sitting there like, okay. Yeah, like that was awesome. That was
Mm.
awesome.
Yeah, I think there's some shots in that fight. Again, I think
Mm.
it's really crucial that Ryan Otley takes over
Mm.
at that climactic
Okay.
fight as well, because I
Okay.
think there's some like just really big and awesome images that are still images in that fight. Um,
There are.
now
It
in the
just it was so weird to me that it's like you don't see him the whole time and then you do, but I guess again that's the reveal of the turn. You
hmm
turn and then you
hmm
see who it is.
yeah, right,
So
right.
yeah,
Well, even then the
yeah.
next issue after that, which basically is just like one big fight, along with like a lot of backstory, I guess, where they just kind of do
Right,
the backstory dump. Um,
right.
but so Yeah, so what I kind of going back to what I was saying is that like I can totally see how like if you are really into the fluid action of animation that this
Right.
show does do it really well. I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is really fun. It's kind of interesting too because like would I say this is like a well animated show? Because like the
Oh,
like static
mm,
scenes are so like almost like
it's a
Archer
pretty
like,
cool.
right? Like it's
Yeah, yeah,
almost where
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's like they're moving
It's
the
not as high end
lips
as
on
I
a
wanted.
still image, right? Like sort of
It,
thing.
Yesterday? Oh. Oh, that was you! In the blue and the yellow?
Yeah, that was me. I'm invincible.
it was not as high end as I was wanted. I was like, really, Amazon? This is like the best you can.
Right, right.
But I still think it conveys some scenes really well with some action.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
for sure.
but I don't think it's just the action. Like we're talking about that scene because it's so pivotal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the characters like, and I should say that I only read up until it was like issue 13 or
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be spoiled for the show because I personally like the show more, and so I do not want to know anything else that happens until I see it in the show. Um, but what I and I say that because I'm sure some of the things that they chose to do in this first season are things that happen later in
Right.
144 issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of course,
Yeah.
they just decided to put some of it sooner. But I really liked getting more about Invincible's like fear and wanting to prove himself to his dad and saying like you hit me and that scared me because I started rewatching the show to be like because I really wanted to double check some stuff.
Mm.
And those are super powerful scenes between him and his dad or like training. Obviously, I love the training. You know, the dad's like it's trying to pee your pants. You know, stuff like that isn't in here. But even more than that, just characters like what Robot wants, how Robot feels about Monster Girl,
Mm.
about the guy who's got stone skin and seeing kind of his backstory and how he sort of manipulates Invincible, which because you would. One of my favorite fight scenes in the show is when the guy with the like circuit helmet brings in like all these, you know, interstellar warriors. And then at
Right.
the end of the season, when it like cuts to each of these different groups we've sort of learned about, and the
Mm.
idea that they're all like something's gonna be happening with them next, I'm like, yeah. So like I agree, it's sure it's the action, the fluidity of that, but there's so much more character and emotion I feel in the show than in this. Again, I feel like I'm watching a writer learning his chops, and there's like really
I,
good bones there, but he gets to flesh it out in this.
yeah, I think you're just seeing stuff that comes up later in the comic. I think it's all there in the comic. I mean,
I mean,
I
the later things with Robot and stuff, I'm sure, probably right.
right. I
But
think
those
the thing
moments
with
between him and his
Concrete.
dad,
Well, yeah, like and
yeah.
I'm not again. I haven't like read it all the way through. I did like those moments. I did.
I mean, it's tough because you know he's a killer at that stage, right? So maybe
Right,
that hurt your
right.
ability to appreciate some of those,
And I
right?
feel like a lot of something that the show did that I didn't feel from the comic is I feel like they're
Hmm.
trying to foreshadow that Mark might have some sort of like badness in him too. I can't remember the exact beats
Interesting.
that happened, but there were like a couple
That could be
beats
cool.
where I'm like I feel like they're like
Hmm.
foreshadowing something here like father like son. I think the big
Oh,
thing
well, that happens like in the very next issue because I stopped reading because I don't want to say
mm,
what happens, so there's not spoilers. But I was like, okay, yeah, no, that's definitely
oh
past the
god.
show.
Right.
But there is a character that says that to Mark, basically. So that might be what
Mm,
you're thinking of, like in
yeah.
the very next issue after this sort of capper, if you will.
Yeah. I
Um,
think that the
which is
advantage
cool.
that the show has that you're feeling is that like it it has more space. I mean, if we're talking about what was it, 8 episodes or something of
Oh yeah,
like
8 episodes and only what was it, 13, 14 issues? They took their time with this. It was, at least to me, it felt that way. The
what do you
13 issues
for the show taking
for the
their
show.
time?
Like
Yeah.
I feel like they really took their time to like dig in to these, and they added stuff, of course, I'm sure happens later. But it felt like they really took their time with these first 13 issues.
Yeah, I think it's
So,
just kind of a little bit of a difference between having like a drama that you're seeing with
mhm.
actors versus a comic. Comics
Uh,
do other things a little bit better. This is not on high on my list of like greatest comics,
Right.
of all time. As far as like the show goes, I enjoyed it. I
Mhm.
don't think I'm like as bowled over by it as
Well,
you
if you're
are
not into
though.
animation, that's probably not gonna, you know.
Well, yeah, and this is making me wonder about our difference with Arcane as well, which I think we'll talk about a little
Oh,
bit
right. I
later.
wasn't even thinking about how that could relate. Yeah, because if
Yeah,
you're not
where
into
like
animation, it's like, eh.
yeah,
Who cares, right?
like judging it on a
Yeah.
pure story level, I do think it's smart to foreground that betrayal because then you
Mhm.
have that to propel you through the rest of the show. That
Right.
said, I started getting like a little tired of the mystery thing. I like
Right.
that
The
it's
mystery box
dramatic
lasts so long.
irony. Right.
Mhm.
And it's not really a mystery because we kind of know. I mean, we
It's
don't
no, we
know
know. That's why I want to say
why.
how it's different than Wheel of Time, right? It's like we know, we just don't know why, right? Like
Right,
we know what
right.
happened where other characters don't, so we're smart. We know more, right, than other
And most
characters. So that's
importantly,
cool.
I know why
Yeah.
it matters. I know why this is going to matter. I know what's at
Right.
stake here. It's
Right.
this relationship, this father-son relationship, which is going to
So
I
overall, I think we agree it works, but maybe it just feels stretched a ways.
it feels
Yeah.
stretched in a way where I was like kind of I want to get to that consequence. And of course I
Right. Like
know in the
why?
back of my head, well, this is not happening until like
The last episode.
episode 8, right? Like you
Right.
just
Right.
know it because of the structure of
Mhm.
the thing. And
Sure.
like I did think the demon detective was a funnier joke and kind of worked better in
So
the show
funny.
than it did in the comic because you
So funny.
barely kind of even get the joke in the
You
comic. And
barely get Donald. You don't even get the what's that other guy's name? Yeah, you barely get him at all.
right,
But
the
he's
kind of
Cecil.
CIA Cecil,
Yeah,
yeah, that
Cecil. Yeah, he's
agent.
great. Such a
Yeah,
fun
no,
character.
he's good,
Um,
and obviously goes on with the comic, but
yeah,
like,
I could tell that he would be in the comic later, but just to get him sooner, I thought worked really well. To see him frustrated by like the Guardians of the Guardians of the Galaxy. You
yeah,
know what I mean? The Guardians' death. Um, but I do want to say like I think it's not all that. Like I mean, if we think of the type of writers we were at 22 versus 15, 20 years later, I think we know more as writers. And even a scene like, and I do get the comics are a different medium and you can only fit so much in, but like even the scene with Invincible and his mom where he's training flying in the middle of the night. Okay, training. Obviously, I'm gonna love it, but stick with me. So he's having trouble landing, and he keeps making these craters, right? And his mom's like, "You gotta. What are you doing? You gotta go to bed, right?" And he's like, "Make me." And she looks at him hardcore and is like, "Does that make you feel powerful? To knowing that like
mm.
I can't physically make you go inside?"
Need to practice.
Honey, it's the middle of the night. I have work tomorrow. You have school. Get inside right now.
Make me.
Does that make you feel strong? To know I can't physically make you do something? Is that what you need?
This is important.
I was like, oh, like it's just such a real moment between a mother and son. And then they like sit on the porch steps and like talk about it and everything. And it's just like that sort of character work isn't isn't in this, or not in the beginning at least. I think these are things he, discovered about these characters later on, and is just injecting them sooner. But that's obviously not a scene that's happening. I mean, maybe that could happen later, but these are scenes that are happening early in the narrative because they make sense at that stage in the narrative, like William being
Mm.
gay, right? Or learning about Amber. And Amber in this, at least right now, she's just more of a side, like quick fling thing.
Mm.
Or Eve, how she like goes and tries to just do stuff for the environment. Like she's got a whole like other purpose. She's not just, hanging around because of him, or seeing how Rex is actually a dick before the breakup, but then seeing some good stuff with him with Monster Girl. And again, maybe some of that stuff happens later, but each of those choices earlier make the moments that then happen after them hit more. So I'd agree that there's the action, but there's just so much more beyond that with the characters that's set up earlier, and you get bigger payoffs because of it, in my opinion.
I think so. I don't think you can say it's because he's a better writer. I think it's because you have a lot more real estate here, a lot more room
Well,
to
and
work
knowing about
with.
his world and his characters, he got
Yeah,
144 issues to figure out his characters. Like, I definitely know my
sure.
characters more when I finish a book. I'm like, oh, that's who they are. Cool, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of it too. Just him, knowing his world and people more.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree with all those things. I think pacing is just kind of such an interesting difference between a comic and a show, and how you're going to pace it, and what you're going to put in and what you're not going to put in.
Right.
And like those 22 pages, man, like what you have to work with there. I mean, you want it
Yeah, and
to
you're much
have
more
the
knowledgeable
same.
about this than me. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
He's written comics, everybody. So he knows the tightness of it.
You want it to
Yeah.
have the same emotional hit, and I do agree that this has more emotional hits. But it just seems like they're like, okay, we have this structure already set up, and these events already set up, and we're just going to delve deeper into each of them because we have the time to delve deeper into each of them. We have the time to delve
Yeah.
deeper into Amber and make Amber an actual character. Like, if we
Right.
have, I feel like we have Amber be an actual character. We have, the love interest of William. I forget
Right.
whose name that is. She was actually
Yeah,
like
who's
the
just a
really
throw-in.
big star. Jonathan Groff was like this guy who only shows up in one episode or something, and I was like, oh well, that's really. I mean, the voice talent
Right.
on this show is off the
Oh.
chart for one.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
like
Oh, dude.
they
It's
got
so good.
everybody, and they're all really great.
Everybody.
Yeah.
They got everybody. And so yeah, that's a huge factor too. Same for me in Arcane.
Yeah.
I think the voice talent there is amazing. But Invincible especially, like these are tons of known actors that are just phenomenal.
Yeah. I will say I don't like the gay best friend. I feel like that's pretty tropey. Where I
just feel like we get more about him.
we
in
get
this
more
one.
about him. He's more of a
Yeah.
character, but I didn't like.
Right.
I think they could have thought a little bit longer and harder about who that character was going to
Well,
be than
so
the
that's the
comic
thing.
relief gay best friend, which is like, come on, are we still doing that? I mean,
I hear you. And I'm glad you brought it back because when I gave that laundry list, I was like, all I said about him was he was gay, and I wanted to say more than that. So I really did like him in this. I really enjoyed, when I say this book, I enjoyed his speech about how he likes his name William, right? And he always sort of struck me as, now again, I saw the show first, so it could have thrown me, but he struck me as gay in this. And it sort of felt like Game of Thrones to me in a way, that in Game of Thrones, you've got Renly, you've got Sir Loras, you've got the Rainbow Guard, but they never talk about him being gay, right? But then in the show, he's gay. And then you look back, you're like, oh yeah, I guess that is what George R. R. Martin meant, without, saying it. And so it feels like to me, some of the ways he's animated, or when he says like two guys like us with the girls, I'm like, are you kind of saying that? So he does feel to me like maybe he was intended to be gay, and maybe I'm just adding that to the character. I don't know.
That might be
But
revealed later on in the comic. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah, I don't know either, obviously. So.
But yeah, I mean, I just that choice in general, I was just not as enthused about. I do like Amber. I like that character. I do like what's going on with Eve more. I did find Rex to be too much.
Babe. Oh, hey! It's the Iceman!
Rex.
Couldn't have won that fight without you. Oh! Except we did.
They got old and ran away.
Still counts.
Welcome, Invincible. My name is Robot. Apologies for Rexplode. He's
Unbelievably awesome.
incorrigible.
And rude.
And bored of it.
And I like that voice actor, but
Yeah,
like
he's good.
that was one of those where you're like, why was she even with him in the first place? Like, you gotta give me something likable at all
with
about the
Monster
guy.
Girl. I feel like you get more likability from him in that. I mean, you just get nothing in the comic book, besides him,
Well,
like,
he's
feeling
also
bad
not
afterward.
as he doesn't seem like outwardly ridiculous in the comic book. Like, he seems like kind of like a little bit of a dick, but not like a
Barely.
huge comic relief dick in the show, right?
No, he's not, well, so this leads me into something. I feel like he knows how to write comedy now. I feel he didn't in this for the most part, at least not for the initial issues. Like, there's a scene between when he's getting his new suit from the guy who makes suits, and it's not really funny. But you go back and you watch the show, it's same amount of space for the most part, but there's jokes in there. Like, and not just from the tailor, from the dad. And it's fun. So I feel this is why I say like I feel he's grown as a writer because he's doing things
Well,
that he didn't do here
I
and
think
wouldn't
he
take the
also
same
has a
amount of
writer's
space.
room. He also has a writer's room here. This
Fair
is
enough.
not solely
Fair enough.
Robert Kirkman writing this. This is Seth Rogen is like an executive producer of this show, right?
It's
And
true, yeah,
so,
because he's the voice of one of my favorite characters in
yeah,
the show.
yeah.
So I believe that. I believe that. Then I just I don't know, man. I was like, I am watching. First, when I didn't know it was Robert Kirkman, I was like, how did they do this? How did they take what was here and just make it so much better? They made this to me feel like a draft, and then we were getting to watch the
Mm,
final copy. I was
mm.
like, how did someone adapt this so well? It was a moment of like, how could anyone ever be that good a writer? And then I saw there was like him, and I was like, oh, okay, this makes some sense. And as you're saying, is probably completely right. Because I'm wondering how do they structure the rest of the series and still have the through lines that they do with changing, people. So they got to be working as a team. And it would make a lot of sense that as a team, you get someone to be like, oh, toss this in, oh, toss this in. So it becomes the sum of those parts. And that's the beauty of an adaptation, right? That's like getting to watch an adaptation really go beyond the source material. Again, in my opinion, that I
Yeah.
think a lot of people were hoping for with something like Wheel of Time. Like, let's get a lot of talent together, see what happens. So anyway,
Yeah, it does seem like it has more of like a vision of what it wants to be. To
yeah.
to me,
There's some
watching
good
it,
writers working on this, whoever
yeah,
they are.
I think there's some like it's really solidly funny throughout. So I think like the
Yeah.
the comedy is solid. They do take a lot of the setups. I mean, like the Seth Rogen character in it is directly from the comic. The setup and the core
Yeah,
joke is the same
that one is,
from
yeah.
the
hmm
comic. But there,
Alan, right?
huh?
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, I
I
can't
think
remember.
I think the one eye guy's name is Alan.
Oh
Yeah, I love
right,
this guy.
Alan the Alien, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think that's all really solid,
Hmm.
and yeah, to me like this doesn't feel very different to me. This feels like almost like
It's
what you were
it's so
talking
different.
about, where if you were staying
Right.
super true. I mean, this
hmm
is the thing I would say though. I don't think anybody who's a fan of Invincible, the
Mm.
comic, would come to the show and go, they have violated the sacred laws of the
I was wondering
universe
about
of
that.
Invincible here. Like, there's
I
nothing
was
in here
curious.
that feels like a deviation. It feels like more in depth, like
Mm.
you're taking what is there
Right.
and you're like, let's flesh it out
Expanding on it.
more. Let's make Amber
Yes.
more of a character because we're,
Right.
again,
Right.
already going, and maybe decompression in the comic book could have helped this a little bit too, or
Right. Right.
compressing
Right.
it more in the comic book could have helped it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we
I know
only
what you
have
mean.
so much space. It doesn't
Mm.
surprise me that Amber isn't really
Yeah.
investigated yet in the comic, and I think it does go on that she becomes more of a character. But it makes sense to me that you're like, okay, here this is. We have a lot more space where we can
Mm.
do this. We know we're ending at the big dad fight. So
Sure.
what are we
Sure.
doing in between here? Well, now we can do these things, and it doesn't feel
Yeah.
like changing anything. Nothing really feels
Yeah.
changed here to me.
Yeah.
It feels
There were little
more,
moments.
you know,
Sorry, go ahead.
it just feels more the word I'm looking for, just more
Mm.
interrogated, just more fleshed out, but not
Yeah.
changed.
I think
Unlike
that's
Wheel of
why
Time, where
I
you can say there were things that were majorly changed, it wasn't
right.
like fleshing out the bones that were already there.
Exactly, completely. I think for me at least, that's why I normally will prefer a book to a show because the book has more. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it gets to dive in. And this
Right.
was the reverse. The show got to do more
Mm-hmm.
with this material. And so, I think you're right about that. I did try to go back with that sort of perspective. And from a perspective of, I don't want anything to change, like I just want this on screen, it is changed in terms of like the order that events happen in. And I was wondering, like, is there a fan out there that like, I want the Samson Butler scene? Like, I want the Samson Butler to come in and ruin the, funeral and everything. Because I was like, that
Oh,
is
right.
actually kind of a cool scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's a fun idea that,
Right,
during a
right,
funeral of
right,
superheroes, you get villains who are like, no, it was supposed to be me that killed him, right?
right,
Now, like,
right.
that totally makes sense to
That
me.
was a one side
Um,
story that they didn't do, which seems interesting because
yeah,
they do like so many of the side stories, and they even
they
pick
do
in
so
other
many
ones
others.
from like
Where
other
they do
parts of the
so many
series.
others.
Yeah.
But they flesh everything out. Like in the book, they've got him tossing the bag, right? And then like an issue or maybe two later, the bag lands in London, right? You got a guy like, what? But in this, they went with like the whole speech of those guards in the beginning, which is so crazy
Right,
long.
right, right.
And then you've got the guy with the son in London with the bag hits, right?
Right.
And that's when the son finally calls him dad and everything, which honestly worked for me. Got me. I was like, oh yeah. But
I
that
think
that
that
again, they're
joke.
just
I think that joke kind
they
of
just got
sucks
real.
in the comic and kind of sucks in
But
the show too. Like I was like,
they
but
got Burger
you
Mart
can
here or
tell he's
whatever.
very attached to that joke.
He
That he
was
was
really
like,
attached though. That probably was a big. I don't know. I really liked it in the comic. I was like, that's clever. I had forgotten that it happened
right,
in the
right.
show.
And imagine if it
Completely
comes out
forgotten.
months later. I mean, that was
Right.
really wild. Like reading it in the graphic novel, I was like,
Right.
I might have the first
Right.
time I read it just had it completely go over my head because you
Right.
would
Like, what is
easily
this?
forget that happened
Yeah.
and be like, wait,
Right.
why? What?
But the what I'm getting at is that in the show they make that like a character. It feels like there's
Right.
fewer wasted moments, more things tie together, and I feel like you can do those neater ties because you got the pullback, right? It's like we were talking for Wheel of Time. Like now that you know book two's written, right? Like you got book two to work with as well. You don't have to
Right.
just do book one. That was all Robert had when he was writing Wheel of Time. Like you don't just have these first 13 issues. You've got the rest to think about how you want to and where it's going as opposed to just one issue at a time. And so there can be this greater sense of connectivity, which I think is really cool.
I will say I have one
Ooh.
complaint about the reveal change. Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
I
Yeah, yeah.
know
Bring
we've
it.
talked about reveals before. I don't like them.
Mhm.
I love an Invincible that we know it right away. I think that
Right.
is really
Right.
strong because you care about it now instead of just
Mhm.
flinging a reveal at you suddenly, sort of the way the
Right.
comic does. That said, as I was watching it and watching how
Mhm.
it wrapped up, I'm like, I don't understand the
Right.
timing on this. Like, why did he kill them then?
Right.
And if he killed him right then, why is he just kind of hanging out for all this time past then? Like, what's he thinking? Like, I'm gonna kill him now, and then I'm just gonna
Right.
go along like everything's normal until I kind of get forced out of this by the investigation. Like, the investigation kind of forces his hand in then revealing this to his kid. Whereas I
Right.
like in the comic how he's just decided, okay, now is the time. And immediately after he does it, he's thinking about how he's gonna tell Mark. And then he like
Mm.
the pauses he's kind of like there's a scene in the comic where he's kind of testing out the speech that he's
Right.
going to
Yeah, yeah,
do to
yeah.
Mark, and then
Which I did like, yeah.
yeah, and then and
Mm.
this made more sense to me. Like he's decided now is
Mm.
the time. He does the action, and this feels very real to me. Like sometimes you want to reveal something to a loved one, so you do like an action to kind of force yourself to do
Mm.
it, or you do something that's
Yeah.
gonna like force the issue because you know you won't overcome this
Like
communication
do it
issue
normally.
otherwise.
Right.
And then he does it, and then it felt very human to me to still be like, oh wait, I've done this now. I kind of have to now reveal this, but I'm still hesitant because he knows he's gonna take it badly, right?
Yeah.
And so like that, it made more sense to me on a character level how it goes down in the comic, whereas in the
Mm.
show it feels contrived. I know why they're doing it because that gives you the hook for the rest of the series to keep you involved. But when I reflect back on what is the dad thinking,
Mhm.
I don't know what the dad is thinking. What is he waiting for? Why is he's
Sure.
just hiding the costume up in a trash bag like above the cabinets, which is
Oh, that part.
awful, like not a good
Well,
hiding spot.
he does say that he did that kind of in the hopes of being discovered. Kind of the same
Mm,
thing you're talking about,
mm,
right? Um, because he tells her like, maybe I wanted you to find it, maybe I wanted to not, keep
right.
living this lie, sort of thing. I do feel it's so. I think that he doesn't really have a good answer overall. Like, I do think this is one of the weaknesses of
Right.
Invincible is that at least in this one. So here's the difference to me. In the show, we don't fully know. Like we don't fully get the answer of why exactly he's doing what he's doing. We do get to a degree, but not all spelled out. Whereas in this, we get it all spelled out.
Uh-huh.
And this to me, it wasn't as compelling. I was like, this gonna be sort of okay. And so I'm waiting and hoping that the reason will be like a little bit better in the show, which I think again he's had time to think about it and he's got help from the writers room, right? So it will be. And I will say what I think the show does, even though I agree with you, I really do like him two things you've said that I really agree with. One, the longer we spend with him without him doing this totally atrocious thing, the more we can just like him as a character. Talking about the dad, right?
Right.
And then two, that I like him trying to figure out how to say this to his son,
Yeah.
because it shows a humanity in him, right? That
Right,
he's
right.
like, it shows he does care, which then makes the end hit better. And I will say there is a last line that I didn't get to rewatch the very end of the show again that I think works really well when it felt contrived how they got there. I know I'm adding one extra, but I think it's important. It felt contrived in the dialogue how they got there, but you get the dad saying, "What will you have in 500 years, whatever?" And he's like, "I'll have you, dad."
Right.
Dad, right? And I was like, that's
He says
that
that
hit
in the
nicely.
show. He says it in the
Does
show.
he say
And
does
I
he say
feel
I'll have
like
you in
it didn't
500 years?
hit.
I know he says dad, but I didn't remember him saying I'll have you in 500 years. Maybe I just forgot it.
Yeah,
You know,
but I
it's
think
been a-
that's exactly the
okay,
same.
okay,
And it's
all right.
interesting when I
Well,
watched
then
it
never
in the
mind for that
show.
one.
When I watched it in the show, it felt, yeah, it didn't hit as well. Man, that's too bad. I'll have to look back and
Yeah,
maybe
I'll have to
examine
rush
that
because I
better.
will say it hit. The stills
Hmm.
really hit for me on this one of the way he was laying there, twisted, saying "dad," as opposed to because I just stared at it,
I
right?
think in
Especially
the
for the
show,
splash
let's
that
talk
happens
about the
after.
let's talk about
Yeah.
action because I think the
Mhm,
reason why it didn't hit for me in
mhm.
the show is he is so wrecked in the show.
You, Dad. I still have you.
Like the show
When
goes
they hold him up on the train, oh my, like
hold on,
what?
it goes overboard, and I do like this.
I mean, that seems amazing.
I do
That seems
like the
amazing.
kind of over the top
Yeah,
violence that
yeah.
combined with the tone of the show makes it
Mhm.
super palatable. It kind of feels
Mhm.
very similar to me to the Harley Quinn cartoon where like the if you actually like look at the
Also,
violence in the Harley
also
Quinn
one of the greatest animated shows
cartoon.
of all time, everybody. If you have not watched Harley Quinn show, go watch
See,
it.
maybe
But
we
anyway,
should
sorry, go ahead.
compare. I like that show a lot better, actually. I feel like weirdly
Interesting.
more
Okay.
emotionally invested in the Harley Quinn show than I did
Maybe,
in this
maybe
Invincible
we're
show.
inverted like this. You like animated comic things,
Mm.
whereas I like comic, oh no, animated comedy things, and I like comic comedy things. Maybe we just switch on this. Anyway,
Comic comedy things. Okay.
yeah.
But yeah, I think like at that point, like he's so wrecked that I
Mhm.
couldn't buy him saying "I'll have you, Dad" anymore at this point.
Oh,
I
right,
feel like
because
he's
he's like,
too wrecked.
well, and his
Like
dad has just done some like, like he's just murdered so many people using his
crazy things
body.
compared to the
Whereas in
comic.
this, he's just like, you see how one punch just kills thousands of people, but you don't see the bodies. It's
Yeah.
just like destruction. So it doesn't feel quite as much like his fault. He's just trying to show him something like, look, I punch you, thousands of people die. Like all I did was
Hmm.
punch you. Like this
Right.
is it, right?
Right.
And it doesn't really feel as blameworthy, you know?
Yeah.
So I do feel you on that. I'm coming around on that. I do agree. What I would say though that I liked about the show is that I feel they do give Omni-Man a bit more of a reason that still has not been fully said yet. So
Mm.
maybe it'll be disappointing when they finally reveal it. But I feel they do give him a bit more of a reason to do what he does now because they've been talking about him getting his powers, right? And
Mm.
then he's like, I got my powers. And his dad's like, you sure? Almost making it seem like he thought Mark wasn't going to get his powers. And then there's even a like right after that, he's like, I thought everything. No, the dad says things might have been better if he never got the powers,
Mm.
basically.
Hmm.
So to me, that meant it was all about that his like job as I'm forgetting their name, but wherever he's from, that they have to go have a child. That child has powers, and then it's like that child's job to like take over the world. And because
Mm.
his child hadn't, that was letting him sort of just not have to do it, just like letting him live the life he wanted. So to me, the catalyst for everything that then happened was because Mark did end up getting powers.
Mm.
So I liked that as a reason, and maybe I'm just making that up, and that's not really the reason. I saw people do that with me all the time, like, but Jeff, it means this. I'm like, what you're saying sounds great. That's not what I got from the
Right,
show,
right,
right?
right.
So maybe people watching the show didn't get that, and it felt, like you did. It was kind of like, meh. But that's what I took away from it, and I'm hoping it's something like that or something even more compelling, maybe.
Okay, well let's do final thoughts here.
Yeah, yeah.
better than the book, I would say I like both of them pretty equally. I don't think I have a clear
comparison.
favorite between the show or the comic, and I feel
No
like
comparison.
in the way that they're different is
Mhm.
a function of medium. So I think like
I mean,
I think maybe you just like cartoons better than comics, which you kind of said, right? And like that's more
that's
where
not
this
it.
is coming
I read this
from.
one, but yeah, no,
But there are things
100% not.
I like and dislike about both
But,
pretty equal and pretty
mhm.
faithful, I would say. I would be interested to hear anybody else who's watched and
Yeah,
read both, like how you
yeah,
feel
yeah.
about this, but I felt this was had lots of fidelity to the source material.
Oh, oh, I agree. I think it had lots of fidelity. Honestly, one of the main times I was bored in the show was sort of when they go to the college, and then there's the
Right.
like the robot. That episode just seemed to like go, and I was like, "What's
And
driving
this
this?"
is
It feels sort
my
of random. Um,
worry because this is what
mm,
bounced me off the comic, that it becomes more of this monster of the week sort of stuff, and you
mm,
can kind of
okay.
see in the show a little bit them going like, ooh, we'll set up monster of the week plots, which
Mm.
right, you're not as interested in. You're interested in the
I
dad and
what I will
son.
say that saved it for me though is what I thought escalated the end scene way more than this does is humanity knowing what's happening. Because in the comic they're like they're in the sky, we don't know what they're saying.
Hmm.
But this one they know, and they're
Hmm.
throwing everything and the kitchen
Yeah.
sink at Omni-Man, and that really worked for me because then they brought back that guy who had made like the cyborg creatures
Right. Right.
and had him do it on like dead soldiers, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So like I totally forgave that episode for being kind of a little slow to me, and which was a shame because that to me felt like William's arc episode, and I really wanted
Hmm.
William to have a cool episode. So I think I was kind of doubly disappointed in that it just didn't feel like that episode did much, and I really wanted William to have a time to shine, and I feel like he sort of did, but not fully. But then the fact that they brought it back around at the end, I was like, oh, that is awesome. So I've got a bit more faith in again, maybe the team, right? Maybe it's the team, like sort of edging Robert Kirkman, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this?
Hmm.
So maybe that's it. And so I do have hope in the show. To your comment, obviously I think we'll just have to do more of these to see. I don't think that I'm so against comics I would feel that way. I truly believe what I said at the beginning. I feel like this should be taught in every writing program that exists, comparing scenes back and forth of like, here's how you do a scene that has like good bones, it's interesting, character's interesting, and then here's how you knock it out of the park. Like here's how you create that added layer of humanity, added beats, added moments, humor. There's just so many more layers going on. And again, I do respect what you're saying, which is harder for me to see, which is the limitations inherent in the medium, that there's only so much of that that can be done. So potentially, right, that is having a larger effect on my thinking than I'm thinking. But I don't know, man. Like I do love Watchmen. Like to me, Watchmen is, I mean, it's amazing, right?
Hmm.
Whereas this, I would read and be like, yeah, it's cool, it's a neat idea. But then Invincible, the show, I'm just like, oh my goodness. So for me, obviously, the show is better, and I totally recommend it. I will say it is. I should have probably said this before I told people to go watch it. It is incredibly violent. So if you're not down with insane violence, it's not for you. And sadly, probably not Harley Quinn either. Go watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. That would be my other one of the best. Or Young Justice. If you want to see a superhero show that is not insanely violent, I would say Young Justice is the next best one that exists. I can't comment on the newer ones that have come out on what was it, HBO Max? No, part of it was on HBO Max, but DC had their own channel. Those are yeah, those are shaky. But some of the initial like the initial two seasons, I want to say, you got creators of like gargoyles on that stuff. Like it's good and not as violent.
Okay,
So that's my take.
not to go. I don't want to take
Yeah.
this video too much longer, but I want to talk about this like
Mm,
this violence
yeah.
aspect of it, and kind of like
So
what it makes it work. I mean, there's never a point though where I'm like taken aback by it. Maybe I'm desensitized to violence, but what I want to trace this to for people
mm,
who do know comics is that this you start to see it at the end of this arc of the comic in
yeah.
Invincible, but this really comes from Eric Larson and his
Mm.
Image comic called Savage Dragon, which if you look
Oh,
if you
doesn't
get the
it have the?
trades,
Does he have the thing?
he
Is
has the
that the green
fin.
guy
It's
that's
the
got?
green guy with the
And
fin.
And they've got him in this.
Yeah, he
He's
shows
in-
up because he's in the
Yeah.
Image Comics universe. This
Okay,
Invincible is
okay.
in Image
Gotcha.
Comics. In fact, Eric Larson pretty much gave Kirkman his chance here, and I think hooked him up with this original penciler, Corey Walker. I don't think Kirkman knew Corey Walker. I think Eric Larson said, "Well, I have this guy who wants to draw for Image, and I have this other guy who has this story that he pitched," and he put them together. But Eric Larson, I think, is the pioneer of these like insane
brutal.
superhero fights with lots of blood, because like superhero fights kind of traditionally have been pretty bloodless.
Where like pow. Wow.
Yeah, pow, and
Okay.
everybody's kind of invincible anyway, so you hit and it doesn't
Right.
really do anything. And I think Eric Larson was the first guy that in Savage Dragon, it is bloody. People get like totally
Right.
destroyed, and he's
Yeah.
also like a really great artist. So it might be interesting for you to look at some of that and see
Okay,
how you
okay.
feel about that in still image. And how he draws it and how he makes it. But that was definitely watching the show. I was like, oh, this is a thing that does feel cool to me about the animation, that it feels like I'm
They're going
watching
for
an
it.
Eric Larson comic happening.
cool.
More so than
That's
an
neat.
Invincible comic. It was like that kind of bloodiness and craziness and just over the
mean,
top. Just kind of was
went
heartwarming
for
to
it.
me because it felt like, 19...
That's crazy. Rude here.
to Eric Larson Savage Dragon. So like I did like that as well, and I do
That's
like that
fascinating.
feeling of seeing that.
I mean, I feel like I'm pretty well desensitized to that sort of violence. I mean, this to me like is reminiscent of like the Berserk manga or show, which is really violent, like fantasy dark swordsman, Japanese, of course. But I will say, when I went back to do a rewatch, I did not rewatch the end of episode 1 again. I was like, I'm good.
Really?
Like, I still have some of those moments burned in my brain
That is
of
so
how
funny.
like crazy they were. So I mean, to me, that just means they were insanely effective. And this is going to be,
wild.
I have to say this one last thing. I think also why I'm such like a champion of those scenes is because I love fight scenes where I don't know who's gonna win, right?
Yeah, you've talked
And
about
like
this before.
it seems as if Omni-Man's very powerful, right? But because he is getting beat up, I'm like, I think he's gonna win, but maybe not. Like, and he's not supposed to win, because these are the good guys, right? So I love those moments in fight scenes, and I think that's also why I like the show. I told you what was my other like favorite fight scene: the scene where Invincible gets destroyed by like the tiger guy, or lion guy from another dimension, who's like,
Yeah.
I thought there were strong warriors here. I was like, yes, like because I didn't know he was gonna win, and I love that he did.
Right.
So I feel like that's what this show gave me some more of. If we are gonna talk about like action scenes and types of action scenes, oh man, those are my favorites.
Yeah, that is so interesting, Jeff, because like I would say this show, I never felt a time where I felt like drugged down by this. Like it didn't feel like heavy, even though you could argue that on paper it's insanely heavy, but there's so
That
many
was the only one, I
jokes
think.
and it's so light,
Yeah.
and then the violence is so kind of over the top that it like becomes
It was-
to me unreal.
I think it was just the Red Rush scene. It's just the Red Rush scene.
Yeah,
That scene to me
maybe. I
is
will
like,
say
I feel
multiple
that-
times in Arcane, I was like, this is too much
Oh,
for
really?
me. Where I was like, I don't like this. This has gone over to the
Dude,
part where I just feel
dude,
bad and I
Dude,
just
my
feel
response to that
awful.
was like, Arcane was violent? Like literally, like that was my immediate response. I was like, wait, what violence? I can't even think of one off the top of my head. I know they're there, right? But like, I straight up can't think of one. Nothing to me that I have seen. Maybe again,
They
some Japanese
kill
stuff, of course,
everybody.
comes close to that, right?
I mean,
I
like,
mean,
I think if
spoilers
like,
for Arcane.
oh yeah, sorry.
Well,
Spoilers
they-
in
they
general.
don't-
If
they
you're
don't-
watching,
They don't
anything.
really. They don't really. But
No, they don't really. But
Right.
there is death in Arcane. Let's
Oh,
just
yeah,
say
there
that.
is.
Let's put that
There
out
is.
there. And
There
I
is,
just felt like
for sure.
that show where I was like, ugh, this is just, that felt
Oh, see, that's how I felt
heavy.
about Spy. Oh, now I'm gonna get other spoilers. I felt that when watching a recent movie that came out with comics. But yeah, I'm just like, why? Like, why are we doing this? So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that difference. Like why
Yeah.
sometimes would we watch something and be like, this is great, or like, yeah, it's fine, or but I'm not really noticing all the violence. And other times like, oh, why stop? Like you don't need to be doing
Huh.
this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That is interesting.
That's another thing we're gonna have to figure out
Yeah.
because I don't know the answer to that one.
All right. Well, everybody, especially if you've read the comic before, I would
Yeah.
love to hear from you about your thoughts. How did this stack up? How does it stack up versus the comic?
Yeah,
What
and I
did you
think it's worth
respond
it.
to? What do you like
I
better?
I do want to say I think it's worth it. If you haven't
Mhm.
done either, I highly recommend you watch the show first. My personal take.
And I want to
And then
do a little.
compare to this.
I want to do a little showing off right now. Here is Jeff. You
Oh,
can't
do
see
it.
it because you don't have the camera, but here
It's fine.
is my signs issue number 1. Oh, it's mirrored. It's mirrored, but it's
Still cool, I'm sure.
pristine condition here. And I just wanted to show that off. Hopefully, I'll get to show off
No, it's
future
cool. And
ones as
I
well.
think it's worth reading. Anyone who ever wants to be a writer, you should read both. You should be required. Reading. But I think it's also just a fun read. Like I did enjoy this. Like it's like, oh, that's fun. So if you got some downtime and you haven't read the comic yet and you liked Invincible or you haven't done either, I recommend doing both, no matter what.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much. Hopefully we'll
Yeah.
do more of these versus
Yeah.
the book. We're going to dive into adaptations, try to figure out how they click, and we hope to see y'all in the next one.
Absolutely. We'll see you then.